Hi and welcome everyone. Welcome to Alta Live. I'm going to wait a few seconds while our attendees fill in. But if you are here for a discussion on what happened to legendary writer and author and journalist Ambrose Bierce, you are in the right place. So welcome, welcome. We've got grand old crowd today. I'm very excited. Oh, we're over 100 already. Here we come. So as the crowd fills up, I'm going to get a brief, hopefully, housekeeping out of the way. Thank you all for joining us at Alta Live. This is the digital series we do at Alta Journal and altaonline.com. Today, I am so excited to welcome Alta Journal contributor Geoffrey Gray and William Deverell. Bill is the director of the Huntington USC Institute on California in the West and a brilliant historian. Today, Jeff and Bill are here to discuss the famed writer Ambrose Bierce, an author and journalist who disappeared after entering Mexico in 1913. Jeff went on a quest to see if he could locate Bierce's remains. There's much discussion as to what happened to Ambrose Bierce once he disappeared after crossing the border into Mexico. Jeff is on a quest to find out for sure. Today he's going to tell us about that quest, and Bill's going to give us some historical context about Bierce and what makes his work so special and timeless. Please use the Q&A button. You should see it right here below the video. We're going to speak for about 25-30 minutes, and then we're going to get to as many of your questions as we can. I will be asking them on your behalf, so type them up and I will get to, again, as many of those as we can. If you are late, if you've got to leave early, if you want to share this with everyone you know, this interview is being recorded and will be posted on altaonline.com later today. So we're going to send you an email with it. You're covered. Don't worry, you'll get to see the whole thing if you've got to bounce early. If you are new to Alta and unfamiliar, we are an award-winning quarterly journal focused on California and the West. This story in particular, Jeff's piece in this and Bill's work for us is very Alta. It's an exciting mystery. It's literary. It's historical. It is inherently Western. This is exactly the kind of stuff we do. In addition to art and culture and cold cases, and all sorts of exciting stuff. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, I do hope that you will check out altaonline.com. With that, let's get to some Ambrose Bierce. Welcome everyone. Oh, and I see that people are tuning in, letting us know where they are. I'm in Novato. Bill, where are you today?
I'm in Pasadena, although I prefer in some ways to be where I'm showing you. That's central Wyoming.
And Jeff, wow us with your location, please.
I am in Valle de Bravo, which is a small town outside of Mexico City, just south of you guys.
Fantastic. So welcome. I want to, before we get into kind of a brief primer on Ambrose Bierce, Jeff, can you set the scene for us? This great writer. He was a reporter for Hearst newspapers, in fact.
He was not a reporter for the Hearst. He was a columnist for the Hearst.
Excuse me.
Big time columnist. And just so everyone understands, Ambrose Bierce, his footprint, his shadow went pretty large in the Hearst papers and across the states. He was a big deal, to the point where I believe, and the fact checkers will surely, can confirm this, but he was at one point the only writer in the Hearst papers that actually got a byline. Pretty big deal. And he was known for his wit, for his playfulness, and for his darkness. Ambrose Bierce did a little bit of everything. But when this story begins, on this dark and stormy night in the fall of 1913, Ambrose Bierce and his columnist days, all his capers at the Hearst papers were long gone. He was an older man, a very cranky man. Basically could be seen any hour of day with a drink in his hand, right? A glass of cognac. Martell was his favorite. And in the fall of 1913, for various reasons, he decided to mount a horse for the first time since his Civil War days and ride into the gunsmoke of the Mexican Revolution, which at the time was basically a country up for grabs. And in the north, it was being controlled by Pancho Villa, who was a bandit, criminal outlaw, and military mastermind. And into this scene rides on his horse Ambrose Bierce. Doing the story and doing the reporting was so much fun. And for everyone here, like Alta, thank you so much for letting reporters like myself go and do these kinds of pieces, having the time and the space. It's truly a rare and special thing to go hunt for missing people that are 100 years old and bones. Go digging up graves is great. But really, no, I just want everyone to understand how special it is, and then to have the chance to talk about it later, because as writers, we write our pieces, they get published, and sometimes the world spins, but it's really awesome to be able to share the stuff with everybody. So I just want to thank you for that. Bierce marches into the gunsmoke of this revolution, and he writes these weird cryptic letters that he doesn't plan on coming back. He says specifically to be shot by a firing squad in Mexico. Oh, that is euthanasia. So is this just a weird suicide quest that he's on? He was going through some things in his life, and after he enters into Mexico, he is never seen again. Couple letters, not much. Last heard December 26th, Chihuahua City, saying he's leaving for parts unknown.
Parts unknown. And there are while there is a grave site and a gravestone saying this is where Ambrose Bierce's remains lie, that's not necessarily confirmed, and that's something that, Jeff, you went to seek out. In fact, there are four, from my understanding, official theories, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, the four theories about what happened to Ambrose Bierce. One is that he committed suicide. Both of his children had died, as well as his ex-wife. One is that he committed suicide by leaping to his death in the Grand Canyon. Another is that he was executed by Pancho Villa's firing squad. A third is that he was killed by Mexican federal forces. And the fourth is that he died of pneumonia on the way back to the US. So
there's another one, Beth.
Oh, and Bill?
Alien abduction.
Sure,
there is some notion that he was abducted by aliens too.
Okay, well okay.
And the hunt for the Mayan crystal skull.
So we're in a very Indiana Jones vibe right here. Now, before we kind of dig into where Ambrose is now, Bill, could you give us some historical context for those that are not Ambrose Bierce scholars, as you once were at Stanford University? Can you please give us some context of why he's important in Western literature? What makes him so special?
Well, he's amazingly prolific. He writes and writes and writes. He lives at that really fascinating moment between, as a young adult in the Civil War and then up until at least 1913. And so he crosses the boundary between the 19th and 20th century. He's there with the West maturing. He's there with the urban West. He's there to tackle the railroad problem in the late 19th century. And he's also a kind of modernist writer. There's no one doing the kind of writing he's doing when he's writing his stories. It's macabre, it's dark, it's ghoulish. And a lot of that is, I think, Jeff and I have talked about this, I think a lot of that pertains not just to his emotional and mental makeup, but also he's grievously wounded in the Civil War. Towards the end of the Civil War, he gets shot in the head, and it bothers him his whole life, and he's affected by the war his whole life. So it undoubtedly plays into the kind of Edgar Allan Poe, Gothic, and then some nature of his writings. But he is really famous, and the Hearst newspapers recognize that and put him to work because he's fearless, and he tackles anything. He's sort of Herb Cain who hates everybody. Yeah, sort of how I think of it.
One of the things that, when we had chatted earlier is there an Ambrose Bierce, a present day version of Ambrose Bierce? And the kind of collective consensus was a struggle to come up with someone who really encompasses now what he meant at the time. Have any more names sprung to mind other than a Herb Cain who hates everyone?
Jeff?
It's tricky. One of the things, while he was dark, he was also like, he just had this a very rare ability to point out the bizarreness and the absurdity of life. You know, to him, to be a cynic was like a truly a high honor.
All right. Well, if in the chat, please let us know if you think that there's a present day Ambrose Bierce. We are very curious. All right. So Jeff, what inspired you to kind of challenge and want to define for sure, if possible, how Ambrose Bierce's life ended and where his final resting place is today?
Sure. You know, my motivation for the piece or getting into this kind of caper, very, very simple. One, I've always been a fan of Bierce since I was a young kid. You know, I used to read a lot of Kurt Vonnegut back in the day. And I thought Vonnegut was just like, man, like this guy he was really speaking to me when I was 16. And I thought, you know, if Vonnegut he knows everything, who is Vonnegut's hero? And Ambrose Bierce was Vonnegut's hero in a lot of ways. And to Bill's point, he was doing a lot of modernist writing. Specifically, I think in the sense of time, how time elapses in the story. So like when I read, you know, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, it blew my mind. I was like, man, you could tell a story in like a second. You don't have to wait all these months. So from a technical point of view, I had a crush on him. But from an unsolved mystery case point of view, which is really sort of my jam as in writing, I like the odds. You know, I looked at the case and I like the odds here because Bierce goes missing thousands of miles of northern Mexico desert, right? But there is some decent clues and markers pointing his body to this one grave site in Sierra Mojada, which is an abandoned mining town. And I've been familiar with underground penetrating radar and the fruits of GPR. I once went on an expedition to look for Genghis Khan's tomb in Western China, in northern Mongolia, with the underground penetrating radar, which was a mess. I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover with the radar. But here, I thought, man, like there's some eyewitnesses, you know, allegedly pointing to the site. Let's see if we can get a GPR, a radar, to Sierra Mojada and see what we can find. And that's what we did.
And one of the things that you note, so Jeff wrote two pieces for us on Alta. The first is kind of, it's in the print magazine, and it's a larger look at Bierce's life and then kind of possible final days. The second online piece that Jeff wrote was this adventure that he went on. You had to bring, if I'm not mistaken, bribe money.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so you had to bribe people. You drove.
I did not bribe it. You know, this is all being recorded. I did not bribe anybody.
Oh, okay.
But we brought tons of cash with us in the case that anything happened, which is kind of common for, you know, this kind of. It's the West, you know. This is the West. You got to be prepared. With
cash, and you had to. I mean, it's not like you can hop on a plane and land in the Sierra Mojada. How do you say it? Mojadre?
Sierra Madres or the Sierra Mojada. Sierra Mojada.
So how did you get there?
So we it was planes, trains, automobiles, and you know, we flew to this town called Torreon, which is like the seat of this province called Coahuila in northern Mexico. It's known as forgive my language, but it's known as a place that smells like cow stuff because there's a lot of cows there. This is like the big cattle country in Mexico. And if that's true, I can confirm that once you step out of the airport in Torreon, it's like, it really feels like one big farm. But you know, it's a cute sense of smell there. And then we waited for the engineers who took this overnight bus from Guadalajara, like a 13-hour ride. It was pretty intense. And we left at like 6:15 in this beautiful morning. You know, the sun was just coming up over Torreon, over all the cows, and we took off with these engineers who were like, you guys must be crazy. Like, they're used to, like, you know, scoping for like commercial malls and, like, you know, doing these big projects, but to find like the bones of Ambrose Bierce, like, they were like, what are we doing? But we kind of talked them into it, and they were good sports. They brought all their gear, they were right on time, and we drove 6 or 7 hours through the desert into this area called the Zone of Silence, where no cell phones work. And it's this old like the deserts, I guess, were all once seas, but you see seashells and there's these weird triangle-shaped turtles and people that live in the zone of silence called zoneros, I think is their name, because they love to not be found. So it really got to be this like interesting Mysterioso story until we got to the right to the outskirts of Sierra Mojada. And we started asking around for Ambrose Bierce. And they actually knew who he was, like it was really bizarre. Like even the taco stand people knew, they call him the Old Gringo. El Gringo Viejo. Oh, yeah. So we entered into this weird mythic land where like Ambrose Bierce was like still alive in mythic form in the middle of Coahuila.
And did you find him?
I gotta say, I feel pretty good about what we came up with. I don't have the DNA report. We don't have DNA. I don't have the hard proof, which we would love to have. But I feel like the findings that we came back with were pretty interesting, which were that they were remains. And we found remains in this gravesite that has a reason for being there, and the remains were consistent with remains that could be very old, but it really needs someone, perhaps somebody in this group, to pick up the shovel, so to speak, or to pick up the charge, and take the next step to really excavate the site. We were able to find and confirm, according to the report, there are remains of bones, but now it comes time for the archaeologist.
Bill, what would it mean in the grand scope of history to finally locate Ambrose Bierce once and for all? Would it change anything?
Well, sure. I mean, it would become a cause célèbre. He was famous for disappearing, and he'd be more famous for being found. So, yeah, and it would reawaken a new generation into Bierce's writings. I mean, somewhere he is just enjoying this so much because the guy was fascinated and saturated by death, and the fact that we're so interested in his death. He would get a thrill out of that. The circle sort of closes. I mean, this is a guy who had a pet skull, and a lot of his stories are about communing with the dead and ghosts. So if you'd said to Bierce, look, you're going to disappear in the early 20th century looking for the Mexican Revolution, he would have said, yes, of course I am.
Now, we're getting a couple of questions just about some details of Ambrose Bierce's life. I'm assuming, Bill, I will direct these towards you, but Jeff, pop in. Can you speak about Bierce's battle with the Central Pacific Railroad?
Yeah, Jeff, do you want to, Jeff, or I can pitch in on that?
Sure, I'll start it. Maybe you can close it. But the railroad was a big issue back in the day for Californians, especially I think in San Francisco and all across the country. A lot of folks were very upset that it was being subsidized by the government, more or less. And the newspaper picked a big fight with the railroads and trying to expose them for taking all these subsidies. And Bierce was handpicked by William Randolph Hearst to travel to Washington and make a big mess and cause a big scene, to the point where he singled out famously on the steps of Congress the head of the railroad and said, who tried to bribe him. And Bierce said, yeah, you can send me a check for $10 million, just make it up to my friend, the American taxpayer. And so he became sort of this, if anyone has seen the movie The Paper, and like Randy Quaid is the columnist in The Paper, I think of, Ambrose Bierce there's some elements of Bierce in Randy Quaid, but he became sort of a populist figure, cross between Randy Quaid and Mark Twain. That's how I sort of see
Randy Quaid is currently insane, but Randy Quaid in The Paper is, I think, who you're referring to.
Yes, the actor.
Okay. The Paper is a great Ron Howard movie. Please.
He really wants to take people down a peg or 2 or 3 or 10. He hates it when Civil War soldiers, particularly officers, valorize their experience in the war. The war is nothing but darkness and grim to him. So he hates that. And he really detests the robber barony of the railroad types, the Big Four and the Central Pacific. So he's perfect from his perch in San Francisco to take on the railroad.
Can you, Peter asks, Bill, how important was Bierce's work as editor of The Wasp in the 1880s?
Great question from my friend Peter, and Jeff, feel free to chime in here. So Bierce is a kind of mentor figure to a whole set of young writers, men and women alike. And I think they're scared of him, but I think they certainly look up to him. And The Wasp is a really fresh, interesting magazine, both in terms of the journalism in it, but the cartoonery and the kind of fearlessness of it. And that's Bierce. And so Bierce is the eminence grise of that young crowd who come of age more or less under his pretty stern tutelage.
I want to, before we dive in to kind of more of the getting in the weeds of like Bierce's actual life, I want to talk a little bit about the conspiracy theories of what happened to Bierce, because I know both of you professionally and a little bit personally, and I know that you're bemused by conspiracy theories and are willing to entertain them, certainly. You don't think the letters that he sent, his final letters were, if I'm not mistaken, to his secretary. Can you tell me a little bit about what they said, and did she keep them?
Cool. So the last, as Bierce was on his horse, like literally he was like in his 70s riding a horse with asthma, and he got sick at the time. He was writing. He
had this gunshot wound to the head.
Yeah, that was, it's, aging nicely after 40 years of being this like sort of Civil War, this vet. He's writing back from the road when he can. He's very frustrated that there's not a lot of mail drops, but he's writing back when he can and reporting on what he's doing. He tried to cross at Laredo where there was Federales. It didn't work out. He, walked the riverbanks. He got in a situation crossing through after Villa took Ciudad Juarez, where he took a sniper. He shot at a federal soldier and received a sombrero as a gift. So presuming people read that and say that he killed a federal officer to prove his loyalty to Villa, debates on that. So he's reporting back the TikTok of his times, but she doesn't keep the letters. Okay, this is the issue.
And what's his secretary's name?
Carrie Christensen, double C.
Okay, and she did not keep the letters.
She destroyed them.
Prolific writer, famous in his day.
So this is a puzzler. I'm curious what folks think about this. Send your theories in the chat about what happened, but why, for such a big cheese like Ambrose Bierce, writing from the revolution in Mexico, the Civil War writer, why would she destroy his letters? Bill, what's your take?
Bill, could he have been a spy for the United States government?
I think Bierce could have been anything. I think a 70-year-old broken down spy, either that's a brilliant move, because maybe he wouldn't attract much attention, but Bierce stood out wherever he was. So it seems far-fetched, but there's so much turmoil and ferment around the Mexican Revolution on either side of the border that in some respects, anything's possible. I think it's very peculiar she's destroyed the letters. And I think you could come up with all kinds of theories to help explain that. And finding out is going to be a chore.
Could he have someone's pointing out, could he have instructed Carrie to destroy the letters?
I'm sure he could have. I mean, she's his personal secretary.
Likely.
Was there scandalous romance involved between them? Were they lovers?
There's some whiffs of that in the beginning of their relationship, but even so, the contents of the letters weren't of a romantic nature whatsoever. Or well, at least the parts that she recorded. So he wrote back also to his family at the time. His last letter was not to Carrie Christensen. It was to a woman named Blanche Partington, whose father he was friends with and who he became friends with and a mentor to. So to me, it's a mystery why she would destroy the letters. It's a curious decision.
Another twist in the disappearance. Another question from Peter. What do you think of Carlos Fuentes' novel, The Old Gringo, and subsequent movie version? We've got a couple of questions about The Old Gringo.
I personally started to read, as we were getting going with the assignment, I thought, okay, let's get some references. I want to like really get into the Bierce world, and I kind of overcooked, really overdoing it on the research. But as I was reading the book, I thought, man, like I kind of want to prefer to have my own experience with Bierce. So I read like the first couple of sentences, and I was like, this is a bad idea. I'll put it down. So I'll turn that one to Bill.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm no expert on the fictionalized Bierce. So where I pick up the thread and my interest in Bierce is the late 19th and early 20th century before he goes to Mexico and that crowd of writers around him, Frank Norris and others. I'm really interested in that moment and how he affected their writing because he clearly did. So, but I don't know. I'm not expert on the Fuentes work.
Sam, our brilliant former intern, asks, are there any theories that Bierce lived past his disappearance? Sam, good question.
Jeff.
Is there any evidence? Are there rumors and as in your kind of explorations in Mexico where they're no, he's not buried here?
Yeah, he's still down here, There's
other than the alien
look a lot like him. I think that the longest, there are some theories that have him literally going to look for the lost Mayan crystal skull with a British explorer, and that sort of puts him well past into the farther reaches of 1914 and after the revolution and down towards Central America where he said he was going. So there are some theories for sure that put him that way.
It's a little bit like Butch Cassidy, in the Sundance Kid. Lots of theories that they come back from Bolivia, and it's about the same time. So there's plenty of people that want to go into Mexico, Central and South America to disappear in that period, as there are today. And so it fits a certain genre.
Jeff, can you speak a little more about the myth of the Old Gringo in Mexico? Why was he so mythologized? Are there other figures in the American West who play into Mexican mythology?
Yeah, I think that I don't know if he knew he was doing this, but I do think when Bierce crossed over into Mexico on his horse, he actually stepped into this archetype of like this American cowboy in a Mexican cowboy land, because there's Mexican cowboys too, and the Old Gringo was the archetype of the Old Gringo is an American who's not afraid of much, who is fearless and is really ultimately not afraid of death, which Bierce, if you believe his writing, was not. He was somebody who actually had a death wish. In the Mexican culture, the concept of death is different than it is in American culture. People kind of they convivir, literally, they live with death. So I think that he was sort of playing into those archetypes. But they must have thought he was really weird because he was not a very nice person. And like from my experience so far, like people are actually obscenely nice here. So that I think was probably weird to them. At least that's what they told other people, that he was like just grouchy to no end. But I think he played into that stereotype. I think that he was definitely, some people also called him, before he was known as El Gringo Viejo, the old Gringo, El Ruso, the Russian, which is because of his white hair. And that's sort of how a lot of Mexicans call people with white hair, as they call them the Russians. So he was out of central casting, but like really what was he doing and what happened to him? Was he lost? Was he a spy? Was he not a spy? And ultimately, where did he go? And that's kind of, to me, the story gets even better when you get into the details of what actually happened to him. What turn did he make? Where, did he, how was he following this war? He wasn't really writing for anybody, but he got journalist credentials. I mean, it's a real caper.
Now, part of this caper, there is, and a number of people are bringing it up in the chat and in the questions. If these old bones that you found in an old cemetery get exhumed somehow and you are able to extract DNA, are there living Bierce relatives, known at least, that you could test against?
Well, let's just say I have no plans to actually currently exhume the bones, okay? We got the radar reports, and if anyone is interested, I can connect you to the mayor of Sierra Mojada. He turned out to be a good friend, and a very, very liberal policy of having people in his cemetery. Nice, they're welcoming.
A liberal policy of having people in his cemetery.
It's one of the nice things about the story. You couldn't really go to San Francisco and do what GPR. It's.
But why can't you go and dig them up?
One could. I think that you would probably have to ask first, and they would need to sort of like get it officialized, and but they're interested too. Like the mayor got the contact of the GP, the radar people. they want to know if El Gringo Viejo is really there or not too. So I think they would be down, but you would need a DNA sample potentially. I think that it could be also any study of the bones could be sort of compared against other bones, against other sort of ethnic. I think that ethnic Mexicans from the turn of the century and Ambrose Bierce, from Indiana, will probably have could have different
Sure.
features. So I don't know if you would need the DNA. I'm sure that there are some distant Bierce relatives that may have. But I think that that's the next step.
And do you have any plans to? Oh yeah, and as Lynn points out, the skull would show the war injury.
That could be the key, the silver bullet, literally.
Yeah.
The silver musket ball.
Yeah. Shot in the temple.
Yes, as Ed points out, this could be a financially lucrative tourist attraction in the making. So if theoretically, if this theory that he's at the Sierra Mojada, he is in this grave, he has been murdered by Pancho Villa's, or assassinated, whatever, by Pancho Villa's soldiers. Is it just a cost thing and going through the rigmarole and the bureaucracy of, are you going to follow the steps, or are you kind of like stepping away now and letting the next young explorer?
Send me a note. I'm here. I'm here.
You're up for another 18-hour bus ride.
Let me just say that if regardless of where Jeff goes into the field next and what hunt and what mystery, I'd like to tag along.
Bill's in.
Bill's in. We have two.
Yeah.
Come join us. 18-hour drive, from San Francisco. It's very, or from the West Coast. There's a lot of pretty things to see along the way. But it's really not that bad. And I actually think that, for me, let me say this, and I'm fully interested in looking for Bierce and proving the case. But one of the things that was most important to me looking out is to figure out really who he was, not where he was, but truly who he was as a person. Because one of the suspicions that I had about Bierce is that, like, he was this cantankerous, like, mean, guy. But, like, is that really true? Like, how could somebody be just mean all the time? Like, there got to be something behind it, some kind of motive. So, like, for me, the story was more trying to figure out why he became that way and what he was really trying to cover, as opposed to, like, where he actually landed.
I think we're getting a lot of these questions, and of course, I knew we would go over. If we can hang on for 5 more minutes, everyone, I'm going to try and get to more of these, if that's cool with Jeff and Bill as well. A lot of people are curious about his love life. He's lost his children. Can you talk about Bierce's decline from being a well-known writer to ending up on horseback in Mexico, potentially getting lost, sending cryptic notes, wanting to go disappear to a certain extent? What happened other than getting shot in the head in the Civil War?
Yeah, he was shot in the head before his writing career started, in a way. But what happened, the decline of Ambrose Bierce, although I think he would highly quibble with the decline. I think he would think it as an ascent. To ride a horse into Mexico, that would be high honor for him. But it kind of got to be the point where the newspaper game was changing on him, and he was this old dean of the old school, and newspapers were getting faster and speedier, and nobody really had the time to deal with him. He was a difficult guy. He threatened to quit all the time, and the Hearst papers would generally put up with it and give him a little raise and keep him quiet for a little while. But after a while, from my understanding of it, they just got tired with him. He just became a cranky old man. And he was like, he'd been siloed to Cosmopolitan. He was working at Cosmopolitan, and
Cosmo magazine.
Yeah. Think of that.
It's still a Hearst publication.
Yeah,
even before he goes to Mexico, Jeff, isn't he often armed?
Yeah, he was. One of the reasons why he was feared is he was pretty much one of the only reporters and editors in the newsroom with a loaded, was loaded at all times.
Yeah, and
had a gun. He was like, basically a walking libel lightning storm. Yeah. And libel, like, illegally, and libel also in the streets. Like, people were, he was a man after.
And he had a complicated love life, as we all have.
Quite.
quite complicated. I think that, you know, just kind of in the interest of wrapping it up. Oh, one question that's getting a lot of upvotes here. Kevin asks, he had an affiliation with the Bohemian Club?
Yeah. He was vice president or a secretary, or, excuse me, of the Bohemian Club, I believe in 1897.
Central casting.
Yeah, he was very much in with that sort of the Bohemians, the Bohemian Club, and also to the painters and the sort of the literary salons. And I, you know, thinking about that, you know, he seemed like such a unique person for that crowd because he really came from the military. You know, like he wasn't like Mark Twain, you know, I believe dropped out of the military, and so did Edgar Allan Poe. But Ambrose Bierce was like a major, you know, he was a career military man. So I always thought that was funny to sort of see him in those literary and artist salons in San Francisco.
If he was, you've said he was straight out of central casting a couple of times. Who would play him if we're making a good version of the movie? I see a number of people here have seen the Old Gringo and do not recommend. If we're going to make a fantastic movie about Ambrose Bierce, who would you cast?
Sam Shepard.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You got it. Salty.
Yeah.
Salty and looks good on horseback.
Yeah. And oddly idealistic too. I mean, there's a way in which Bierce is, you know, uncompromising kind of misanthropic guy, but he's also, there's an idealism to him. I can't quite put my finger on it, but he's really unique.
Maybe
no, Sam Shepard is dead, guys. We're finding out that Sam Shepard is no longer with us. All right, well, you'll have to, if you would like Nick Nolte, okay. People are saying also, oh, David Strathairn, I love him. Someone has also pointed out it. I mean, now I'm on the DNA case here. If you know where his children are buried, you could get the DNA and have a definitive match. That's another mayor you're gonna have to talk into letting go through the graves. I guess the last question is if there's kind of a Bill Murray, Renata, you're speaking my language. Do you think, in terms of finding Ambrose Bierce and kind of, if we were to figure out, if we were to solve this mystery, who is next? Who is the next kind of mysterious Western writer? I know Bill had mentioned he wants to do an article about that, IDing the famous skulls of literature. But is there another kind of similar or equally exciting, perhaps Bill, that particularly interests you, or Jeff, your next excursion for Alta? Is there another mystery that particularly excites you along these lines?
That's a great question, but I don't know of one that comes anywhere close to this one. You know, it's always fascinating to follow in the footsteps of Western writers, to see the places that they wrote about, to try to see them through their eyes. But in terms of a writer who went missing, or there's some huge mystery, I'm drawing a blank.
Jeff?
You know, one story always leads to the next, you know?
I got one for you. Everett Ruess.
Everett Ruess, yeah, Everett
Yes.
Ruess. Yeah, people have gone and looked for Everett Ruess through several books. You know, teenage boy who disappears. Yeah.
His name has popped up in Alta.
Early 20s, maybe, yeah.
Convos.
70, 80 years ago.
Yeah.
To me, the two stories that like kind of sprouted from the Bierce hunt. One is I developed I encountered a writer I'd never heard about, a journalist by the name of John Reed, who accompanied Pancho Villa, who was like, he was embedded with Villa, you know, and just wrote some great stuff. So, you know, that was really cool. But, you know, the story that comes to me is the missing skull of Pancho Villa, which is like, you know, of all the gin joints, 2 missing skulls, Ambrose Bierce and Pancho Villa. And allegedly it's at Yale, you know, and how did it get to Yale? And is that really true or not? You know, that story's kind of been picked over a little bit, but that's kind of interesting, no? How did it get to Yale? Is it still there?
All right, another question for Alta. Sam Elliott, guys, we are getting really great casting suggestions here. So I will take notes of all of these and let our Hollywood producer friends know. With that, I want to give a very grateful thank you to Bill Deverell and Geoff Gray, two of my absolute favorite Alta contribs and friends to work with. Before you go, join us next week where we'll be joined by Phil Ross. He's a CEO, he's a tech genius and artist who has created leather out of mushrooms that is so realistic and beautiful. It is being used in Hermes bags. He's going to speak with us as well as Alta contributing editor Adam Fisher next week, right here, August 4th, 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. More deets coming at you in an email right after this. You can find all of Jeff's brilliant articles as well as Bill's and on altaonline.com. We'll shoot you an email later today with all of that. Again, Geoff, thank you. Gracias. Bill, thank you as well. And we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Beth.
Thanks, Beth.